So yeah, man, I'm gonna ask you some questions, and they're definitely from the realm of the not especially informed, but the curious. And I love your podcast. A lot of it makes my mind feel like it's going to explode, but I guess that's kind of the point. So if I ask anything that seems super, super dumb, go easy on me.
No, fair enough.
So UFOs, UAP, as they have been rebranded. Why is this conversation happening within a mainstream realm now?
So going back to 2017, Lou Elizondo, who was the former head of a program for the Pentagon Department of Defense in the US called ATIP, it's the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. Long-winded, I know. He basically studied UFOs for the US government, and this came out in the New York Times, a really reputable paper, front page headline that for decades, the US government's always said, much like the UK, we've got no interest in UFOs. You know, it's all bunkum, hoo-ha, and there's nothing to it. And yet it turns out they've been spending money to the tune of $22 million actually was put in to fund the program. Lou Elizondo resigned because he feels there should be a transparency for particularly the American public, but the wider world, to know more about these objects and what they may or may not be, given some of the traits that they seem to show. So it's taken the best part now of 3.5 years since Lou left the government, a job he did love. He's a really great guy, and he's done a lot of work with some of his colleagues, Christopher Mellon, who was the former Under-Secretary of Defense for the United States, which is quite a lofty position, Jim Semivan, Hal Puthoff, Steve Justice, and others, all very reputable people in their own fields, have been working on this for some time. And it's got to the point where, with the slow and steady release of footage and testimony, with more pilots coming forward, both retired and active in the US military, that the press in the United States has had no choice but to acknowledge, wait a minute, we've got some really serious people now coming forward. With all due respect, these aren't hicks coming from the local trailer park in Texas, or, you know, no offense to folk that live in Texas, I've got listeners there, but that stereotypical UFO nut that we're used to seeing portrayed just wasn't the type of person coming forward. You've got Top Gun pilots reporting seeing 40-foot long Tic Tacs beside their aircraft. So it's a mainstream media conversation now in the US, to the point where the US Senate approved a bill back in December, and the outgoing President Trump, which has now been picked up by the Biden administration, which, as part of that bill, there is a UAP task force report, which will be a declassified report released to the American public in the Senate, which is going to discuss what some of these objects may or may not be potentially, and what they've been doing regarding data collection, analysing, you know, different departments that may or may not be involved as well. So a lot has happened in the last 3.5 years to get to this point.
Are you excited by it?
Yeah, I've had an interest in it all my life, and it was one of those subjects where I think for years and years and years, like, you talked about the same things. You talked about Roswell, or from the 40s, and then it was the Travis Walton abduction from the 80s, and then you would talk about the Betty and Barney Hill abduction from the 50s and 60s, the Phoenix Lights from the mid 90s. But that was it. There wasn't a whole lot of news, and now we're getting stuff almost daily, it seems like, which still isn't enough for people in 2021. You know, the Twitter generation is what, as we're probably known as, but it's incredible the speed and the quality of the evidence and testimony starting to come out now. We're never going to get the UFO landing on the White House lawn, but what we seem to get is this massive folder of evidence, which is just stacking up and stacking up and stacking up. And yeah, I'm excited for June the 25th, when the report is potentially going to come out. And I have to say potentially, because there's strong rumours it may be delayed.
Going back to you for a second, where have you had an experience? Like, where did your interests stem from?
As a kid, I was always interested in kind of mysteries and, you know, things like the pyramids in Egypt and who built them. Being Scottish, the Loch Ness Monster was a big thing when I was a kid. Had all the videotapes and books and stuff I could get my hands on. Always enjoyed going to that kind of section of the local library and finding any books I could. And obviously alien books were always quite a big thing. And as the kind of advent of the internet and stuff, I just kind of kept it up. I had a sighting when I was I think about 10 or 11, I was leaving the Boys Brigade, as the BB, as we've got in the UK, with my 4 other people, my mum, my sister, a friend and his mum. And we were crossing the road in a quite a built-up area late at night in the winter, about 9 o'clock in the evening, dark skies and everything. And along the end of the road, there was about half a mile down the road, just behind some what would be houses next to a football field, there was an object that looked like a Ferris wheel, like a carnival, but it was at an angle, like the kind of Leaning Tower of Pisa almost angle, and spinning on its side really, really fast. And this wasn't up in the sky. This is like down ground level, but quite big. And obviously, I was young and had an interest in the subject anyway. But my mum, who has no interest in UFOs and aliens and all that kind of stuff, she saw this as well and still remembers it. But even she just dismisses it. And yeah, but you know, it was quite incredible what we saw. But she just can't explain it and just poo-poos it to, well, it's not going to be aliens, is it? And I'm like, well, not necessarily, but it certainly wasn't a plane, or you know, it was something quite incredible just along from us. So yeah, I had that sight when I was younger. Yeah,
I feel like if I lived in Scotland or if you lived in Yorkshire, we might have met in that section of the library.
Yeah, that was always a good one. There was always a quiet section as well, which was normally good. But yeah, I used to enjoy my time in there.
Yeah, totally. So when did your interest kind of level up to podcasting?
Do you know what? I've always listened especially the last 3 or 4 years, to a lot of podcasts. Tends to be kind of old school wrestling, or some kind of UFO based stuff. And as we kind of started getting into the kind of lockdown back last year in February, March, the rumours kind of came about, and it was my birthday, and I decided, do you know what? If we're going to have a lot of time in our hands, I've always wanted to do a podcast, but it was either football or UFOs. And there's plenty of football ones out there as well. So I bought a microphone, which I decided would sit in the box and never be used, and I would sell it, or I would use it and start a podcast if we were going to be stuck inside. It sat for about a month, to be fair, with nothing. And I remember just one day, I think we were a few weeks into the first lockdown, and I was driving along after dropping my little boy off at school, when I was like, if I was going to start a podcast, what would I call it? And the name, That UFO Podcast, I just thought, generic search terms. What do people search for when they're looking for UFO podcasts? They probably type in UFO podcasts.
Yeah.
So that kind of came up. And I started with the name first, and then I reached out to a few people, and Gary Voorhees, who was the Spy 1 radar operator on board the USS Nimitz in Princeton during that encounter in 2004. I'd seen him on TV once or twice, and he was really kind and got back to me, and it just kind of went from there. The idea was always, if 20 people listen, I'll be happy. And I'll probably never do another episode. I'll just see how the first one goes, and that's it. But here we are, just over a year later, and it's going quite well. So,
oh, awesome, man. You mentioning football podcasts means that I am obliged to drop in a trailer for my football podcast somewhere around now. So, if anyone hears that, that's why I'm doing it. So, I guess I unquestionably believe in there being more than we understand. You know, that's one of the reasons why I do this podcast. And I'm super curious about that. And I'm probably somewhere between you and your mum, in that there are things that I don't understand, and for the sake of my own sanity, I'm okay with not understanding. And then there are things that I have become obsessions. And I think that UFOs probably fall into that first category, whereas I go, well, I believe in them wholeheartedly. I believe in extraterrestrial life wholeheartedly, but it's so beyond my realm of comprehension that I just go, I really hope that they're nice and they don't want to make me into a burger, I think is my general view. How much time does this occupy of your thoughts?
I've got a young family, and we've just added a baby recently as well. So quite a lot, especially I get a lot of social media interaction and emails and stuff like that as well. So I'm always on my phone anyway. So quite a lot. And as things are kind of speeding up towards this task force report, I try and do episodes weekly. So I'm always getting in touch with guests or planning something. And there's a lot happening just now. So when we finish recording this, I'm recording a news summary podcast of what happened last night with the new footage, the radar footage. So yeah, it's quite a lot. I don't think at the start it was necessarily as much, but as the months have gone on, it's almost like a bit of a part-time job as well as, you know, kind of the full-time job. So it'd be great to be able to do it full-time, but couldn't afford that. There's not a lot of money, put it that way, in UFOs or UAP. But it's not why I started it. It's very much a hobby, but it's grown into something a lot bigger than that for quite a lot of people, which is a bit of a privilege. So I enjoy talking about it as well.
Yeah, totally. There's not a lot of money in UFOs. Really, should be the title of your autobiography.
Yeah, there's a very small section of people in this field that make money, and the ones that do tend to be the people selling something, right, rather than looking for the truth or what might be happening. Or, like I say, I don't talk about constantly, these are aliens or these are this or they're from here. And my pet hates are the people that go on about, well, they're definitely aliens from Zeta Reticuli and they're from this star system with this message. And you're like, oh, you couldn't know that. Like, I like to talk about the what if and what we're starting to get. And if you look at the facts, what we have in front of us, I love the speculation side of it. But for a lot of the podcast, I think what people like tone-wise is, look, here are the facts, here's what we're getting out. And there's a little bit of speculation in there as well, an opinion. But at the end of the day, we've got one of the biggest governments in the world coming out and releasing footage of unidentified objects that may or may not be from somewhere else. And for me, that's fascinating. That it's the what if.
Yeah. So I guess just putting like my tinfoil hat on, I think like it's healthy for anyone to be often skeptical about the motivations for institutions of power revealing the information that they do at a particular moment in time. In a weird way, when Obama spoke and basically clarified that there were things in the sky we didn't understand, which is what it boils down to, really. I'm not sure I kind of responded to that with, bloody hell, Obama's talking about it now. More so, well, why is Obama talking about it now? Do you put any credence to the conspiracy that they're almost trying to draw attention away from something by talking about this stuff?
No, I think people look at the government, right, and this goes for any country, but particularly in the US, it's very compartmentalized, and it's not one well-oiled machine whatsoever. It's a lot of different parts of a function that works, but it works against each other a lot of the times, and that's what you've started to see with a lot of this as well. The more you look into it and the more people you speak to, there's a lot of infighting, a lot of mixed messages, and certain people want certain things out. But what's really spurred this on is you've got the guy who ran the program studying this stuff, who's came out, and he's forced the hand of a lot of people. Because when this guy comes out, one of the big arguments that has been for 3.5 years is, did he work there or not? And the Pentagon's tried to discredit that by saying he had no assigned duties and trying to be clever with their wording. However, the Senator Harry Reid, who was the sponsor for the program, approved the funding, all that kind of stuff. He wrote an open letter last month which confirmed Luis Elizondo is exactly who he says he is, and he worked for ATIP. And so it's not like the government want this out. People talk about the government as if it's a thing, as an alive being, and it's not. It's a lot of different departments, and this was just one of them. And I get there's a lot of talk still that people on the Hill, senators, congressmen and women, a lot of them don't want this out for religious reasons, because they feel this is angelic or demonic in nature, which goes right back to a whole different argument about religion. And you start to look at some of those old books and maybe some of the things that were written, maybe it is demonic or angelic, but not in the sense of angels and demons.
Yeah.
It's just, that stuff people didn't understand 2,000 years ago, they saw in the sky, or things they saw which we are now seeing still to this day. And maybe that's why those books are kind of written the way they are. So, I mean, that's a different topic for another day. But so, yeah, I don't think it's necessarily they're trying to deflect. I just think they're trying to control a bit of a narrative. And one thing I was discussing this last night with some colleagues is, if you are the US, you've got the US, China and Russia, traditionally seen as the three big superpowers. You want to try and control the narrative as well, because just a few weeks ago, and this sounds crazy, but the Russian government and the Chinese government confirmed they're going to work together to build a space station and like moon bases and all that kind of stuff. And it's like Steve Carell's Netflix show, Space Force, is probably scarily close to what's actually going on. So they're talking about dominance in space, and the US now has their own space force, and the soldiers for that are called Guardians. And for anyone thinking I'm making this up, you can go and check this. It is now the new branch of the US military. This has all happened under Trump. Now, they're talking about dominance in space. So why? And if you're going to start going up there more regularly, and you've got Virgin Galactic sending commercial flights into space, if there is anything kicking about up there, people are going to start seeing it. So maybe we are just at the point where this stuff needs to come out, and there's going to be a narrative to control how that information gets out there.
This is absolutely the midpoint for me between the most thrilling thing I've ever heard and absolute terror. Which, yeah, no, I think that's probably the a healthy place to be. What about this guy, Haim Eshed, the Israeli guy, the guy from the Israel Defense Ministry,
the Galactic Federation guy?
Yeah.
It's a hell of a claim to come out and say that there's a Galactic Federation that, you know, we can be a part of if we just behave, you know, human beings as a species, all that kind of stuff. There's no evidence whatsoever for that. It's quite a claim, and you would look at someone like that in that position. They're saying it for a reason, but they won't be the first, they won't be the last. It's too big a claim with not a lot of evidence to back that up. But like I say, and there's a lot of stuff I enjoy listening to in this subject that I'll say that's an interesting story, but for me, a lot of it is just stories.
Yeah.
It's where you kind of put your faith, I suppose, in a lot of it.
Yeah. So what, I mean, it was interesting what you were saying before, that almost, you know, when people are talking about the intricacies of extraterrestrial civilizations, that's almost where kind of credibility crumbles. But when you're talking about actually the nuts and bolts of what people have seen and can't explain, that's much more compelling. What's the piece of what's the piece of, I don't want to say evidence because it's wrong, but what is the piece of footage that you have found most compelling?
I would say one of the 3 videos that were released back in 2017, there was the Go Fast, the Gimbal, and the Tic Tac. A lot of people have tried to debunk these and said, oh, well, it's clearly this or clearly that. But it's when you've got a video on its own is good, or a picture or a bit of testimony. But when you start to get a lot of that together, it's different, you know, that gives it a different context and weight. Now, the Gimbal video shows an object going along at an altitude, being filmed on a camera. And again, people, if you're a layman or you're not, I'm not military, you know, at all. I just know a little bit of this because of what I've been doing. It shows an object like a saucer type shape, kind of flying along at a little bit of an angle. And you would look at that and go, well, look at the poor quality. And this is like $100 million aircraft, but it's on like infrared and stuff like that. So this is the quality you get when you're filming things in infrared or that. It's forward-looking infrared FLIR camera. And the crazy things about it is, as you look into it, it's not the fact this object's flying, it's actually flying quite slowly. That if you flew in an aircraft at that speed, it would fall out the sky. The pilot's audio is also accompanied along with it, where they talk about, look at that thing. The 2 of them talking back and forward kind of break their professional character almost, as they say there's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA, which is another type of system. The object towards the end of the video, which has been declassified, appears to slow down quite considerably. And then you can kind of see the clouds underneath it. It rotates, and then the camera cuts off. Rumours are the longer footage would show it shoots off at an incredible speed, which we don't see. That's just a rumour. One of the pilots who was involved in that has only very recently appeared back on social media, and he's discussed that the object itself was almost being escorted by a V formation of other smaller objects, which they reported having encountered as being spheres inside of cubes. So like a ball inside of a cube.
Right.
This is like the US military pilots, like the best of the best, reporting seeing this stuff, which they didn't for a long time because it wasn't It's not the done thing. You don't talk about this because you're laughed at, and their colleagues laugh at them as well. So you see those aliens up there again, did you?
Yeah.
It's just better not to talk about it. But it's now becoming okay to have that conversation for them. So more and more are coming forward. And Ryan Graves, the pilot, is talking about how the formation of objects banked almost like a traditional aircraft would, sort of formation, but the gimbal object, which you can see on the video, turned at almost a 90-degree angle. Again, we don't have anything that can do that. So when you couple in the fact you've got a piece of footage, you've got pilot testimony, you've got the audio, you've got data which they are seeing in different sensors and radar which show more objects flying that should be falling out the sky, doing turns that we just can't do with any of our aircraft. There's something to it. When what that something is remains up for debate.
Well, that's what I was getting to. Next is when you say that we don't have anything that can do that, is there a conversation taking place that there is another global, a terrestrial power that has technology that can do that?
Absolutely. So for me, if it came out that these objects that are being filmed were Chinese or Russian, they're not going to be Scottish, put it that way, right? So you're looking at one of the superpowers, aren't you?
Yeah.
Then that's the kind of end game when it comes to military dominance, because if you've got something that can now break and defy our laws of physics as we understand them, what's the point? Why send any US Navy carriers out to the sea? Why have F-18s that are literally defenseless against this stuff? Because if you're China and you've got objects can travel at 13,000 miles an hour, you just need to stick a nuclear warhead on these and just tell the US, we've got these and we're now in charge, and otherwise we'll just put one of these over New York and we'll do it in seconds and you'll do nothing about it, because that's what would happen. So I doubt one of the superpowers has this technology, because they seem to be kind of flashing it in each other's faces if that is the case.
Right.
I think it's a lot more likely that none of them know exactly what this is, but they've got a little bit of an idea. And that goes back to that whole conspiracy theory about the government's hiding all this. And I think they know a little bit of what's going on, but the most scary aspect of it being a lot of it they actually don't understand. And that probably terrifies them.
Bloody hell, man. This stuff's so interesting because it takes in, science and psychology in many ways. I just want to go back to that thing you were saying about religion. I'll always remember my dad was raised a Catholic, and I'll always remember having Sunday lunch when I was a kid when he suddenly announced his belief that Jesus was probably an alien, and remember thinking what a dude he was for saying that, but also it's just not it wasn't your average Sunday lunch. But how do you think the society would respond to this being credible?
I don't think it would be the meltdown that maybe we always thought, especially given what everyone's just been through in the last year. I think you look at the internet and the memes that have been going around now for a while, that I think since last summer you've had the okay guys, we're up next, and it's all the aliens standing as if this is the next thing to come along, because remember we had like the murder hornets were going to be coming and all that kind of stuff as well. So you would think if it's one thing after another, and if you'd been told 18 months ago there was going to be a global pandemic, we'd all be shut inside, it would have sounded terrifying, but here we are living through it, and Tesco's still open. So I think people would respond a lot better. I think it would throw up a lot of questions, no doubt, but there's a lot of religions, I think, that, and in a lot of ways, a lot of religious folks seem to be the people more prepared to accept the alien side of the conversation, because they do have that belief in something that you can't quite explain and you've got to have a bit of faith in.
Yeah.
As opposed to people who are very much like, no, it's just nonsense and that can't be true, that can't quite be right. So for me, I look at a lot of those religions as being a lot of stories that have just kind of been passed down for a long, long time, but maybe within some of that, lights in the sky, angels and demons, it's just a different way of talking about these beings that have came from other places, and maybe not always from other places, maybe some of them are from here as well.
Wow. The UAP thing, the rebranding, where's that come from?
A bit of a military stigma. It has been written before anyone else hears this that kicks off, especially on Twitter. It has been called UAP in other releases and press and books and things like that. But the idea being that especially the government don't want to talk about UFOs because that implies flying saucers and little green men. If you have unidentified aerial phenomena, it encompasses objects that are physical and non-physical. There's been, like I say, an unidentified flying object, you think nuts and bolts. But if you encounter what appears to be a ball of energy inside of a cube flying alongside your F-18, that's not really an object almost, is it? That's where the unidentified aerial phenomena, it encompasses a wide range of things.
Right.
And that's how the military language has kind of developed, is how they've been able to talk about it.
Right.
It's a little bit of that stigma, stink off it as well.
Listen, I'm going to go and build myself some sort of underground bunker and try and ride this one out. But thanks loads for talking to me, man. The podcast is in all the usual places, yeah?
Yep, just search That UFO Podcast. It's on all different platforms. It's got thatufopodcast.com for those who like to watch it online, and some of the video interviews are up on YouTube as well.